Great to be here. So yeah, thanks, Helen. As he said, I'm Karen Sawyer. I lead our business solutions group. I'm very excited to be having this discussion with Catherine today, who is exceptionally knowledgeable in this universe and on this specific topic, which is incredibly relevant, I think, to pretty much all of us these days. Before we dive into the good stuff, we do have to let you know that we're not, as part of this, providing legal or tax advice for you. This is a very broad, very extensive, very complex topic. There's no way we can possibly cover it all in an hour, though we would love to. And if you do have questions or specific scenarios you need to dive into following this, we do recommend that you contact your legal counsel to get some advice there. Okay, so before we get into today's theme around the remote workforce, how that has changed, and how you go about supporting that and ultimately being able to pay those individuals, I want to give you just a very quick high-level background of who TalentWave is. We have been focused on payroll and IC compliance solutions for more than 23 years. Our purpose is really to help companies engage with the independent workforce in a variety of different ways, and to do that in a safe and compliant way. We have in-house legal. Catherine leads that team, so we've got an in-house team of legal and compliance experts. We do have a pretty high volume business. As you can see, we process many thousands of W-2s each year, and that number grows every year. And we are registered in all 50 states, so we can provide these services across the country and in some cases globally as well. All right, so for today's specific discussion, we're going to focus on a few key themes here. First, what you need to consider and think about when you have employees who want to work remotely for, it could be a number of different reasons. And in most cases, those are probably folks who are living somewhere or choosing to live somewhere that they did not prior to the pandemic. We're going to talk quite a bit also about how the legislation has changed and how dramatically over the course of just the last 6 months or so. The number of laws and the changes that have taken place have been exponential and have been changing on nearly a weekly basis. And then to finish that up, we are going to talk through a few potential solutions. There's a few ways that you can approach this depending on your organization, your goals, and what you want to do. We're going to talk through a few potential ways you can look to accommodate these requests for your organization. Okay, so truly, as I'm sure you all know, the labor market and the change that is happening is legitimately on fast forward. There are all kinds of statistics out there, surveys out there. This is just a handful of the data points that we thought were particularly interesting. What is consistent across pretty much all of the surveys that are out there is that the majority of business professionals believe that there is a permanent change, or at least a long-term shift in the way that we think about work and remote work in particular. Most people do not believe this is going to go back to what we believe to be normal, at least not anytime soon. Another kind of interesting component is that the majority of folks, in fact, on this one survey, 83%, of folks are pretty determined to continue some form of remote work going forward. So post-pandemic, I think people are really looking at, well, I've been able to do this now for the last 6 months. I would like to continue doing that in some form or fashion, even if that's a hybrid model. And the last kind of piece here that I want to mention is, in addition to just kind of the desire to work remotely, overwhelmingly, it appears that both the employers and the workers find it to be more productive than the previous situation when they were going into the office. I'm sure that doesn't certainly hold true for everyone, but as an overwhelming majority, people feel like they're more productive and they're actually putting more hours in to their workday.
Yeah, and Karen, I would say that I think the question people have is, this is a short-term problem. It'll be over once the pandemic gets under control. But to your point, I don't think that is the case. I do think this has probably shifted the way people look at this, the flexibility that employees may expect going forward.
Absolutely.
All right, so moving on to the new legislation, I could spend days and hours and weeks talking about new legislation, and I still would not get close to touching on all of it. To give you an idea, there have been over 2,600 new laws passed in the USA since March, most of those related to COVID, on a number of topics. And this is at a federal, state, county, and city level, which is something that hasn't been seen much of before. Usually federal and state are active, city and county not so much, but they've started legislating as well. All manner of topics, and I'm sure you're all familiar: sick leave, emergency leave, quarantine leave, face coverings, telework, workplace posting requirements, workers' compensation, and a particularly interesting one on workers' compensation is over 7 states, or 7 states and counting, have the presumption that if somebody tests positive for COVID, that they got that in the workplace. And it's up to the employer to rebut that presumption or prove that that didn't happen. It's hard out of all of these hundreds and thousands of rules to pick one that is, or a couple that are particularly relevant. But being in California, that's where I'm located, one that stands out for employers here is AB 685, which takes effect on January 1st, related to COVID reporting, which is that if an employer receives notice of a potential exposure of COVID-19, the employer has 1 business day to notify all employees and a number of agencies, from OSHA to the Department of Public Health to various county organizations. So quite a steep order. Companies are scrambling to work out how to get that done in 1 business day, and also to define what is potential exposure. Is that your friend's friend, or you actually were exposed to somebody who was positive, or maybe positive, or may have had symptoms? Really difficult to keep up, and that's just one of them. Also, many OSHA-specific COVID rules in multiple states, with new safety standards, procedures, reporting, and in some cases, the appointment of safety coordinators to keep it all going and to administer all the new requirements. There've also been industry-specific laws. So both California and Washington have passed laws specific to the food industry, one related to hand washing. Seattle, specific rules with regard to gig economy workers. Pennsylvania, healthcare workers. Nevada, hospitality, and so on and so forth. So in the 2 weeks since we did this research, many additional laws have been passed, some effective immediately if they were passed under emergency orders, and many others effective starting January. So just a lot to keep up with. So we've put up on the next slide a minor collection of headlines here. I actually saw one this morning, which could have gone here, which is that Elon Musk of Tesla fame has just moved to Texas, which is very relevant to our topic today, from California to Texas, much better for tax purposes for himself. But all of you will have your particular headlines for your industry, which come to your attention on a daily basis, and just shows how rapidly this area of the law is changing and how much you have to keep up with just in your specific locale. So Karen, talk to us a bit about, I think we know it's somewhat obvious, but the catalyst for remote work. What happened to make this such a big deal as we approach the end of 2020?
Yeah, and it is mind-boggling just thinking about what you just covered, Catherine. It's the sheer number of changes, and then the point you made around how quickly some of these are happening. Hopefully that we don't have that velocity going forward, but I think at least for a while, the potential is there, right? This has kind of changed even the way people think about putting laws in place. And now that they've had the ability to do this so quickly, it kind of opens up that can of worms. So anyway, no matter how many times I look at that data, I continue to just be amazed by the sheer number and how quickly that's all happened. So yeah, how did we get here? It's no secret that we have a pandemic on our hands, and that has been the biggest catalyst. Now, certainly, remote work has been more and more common over the years as we have the tools and the ability to do that. But I don't think we've ever seen a shift of this magnitude and again of this velocity as quickly as it happened prior to this happening. So, as you all know, right, in a matter of just a couple of weeks, all non-essential businesses closed. Our kiddos were at home virtually learning, and schools were closed down. Travel became very limited, or at least had a lot of rules and regulations. In some cases, you have to quarantine for weeks if you're going to go from one place to another. And people really had to pivot. Businesses had to pivot extremely quickly to accommodate remote work. In a lot of cases, businesses that had never really contemplated it before, or at least not on any broad scale. As that happened, I think, it was a shock to everyone's system. Not everyone, some have been very good about this in the past, right? But for those who are not used to it, it was a shock to the system. What's interesting is that, over the course of just a few months, I think it's amazing how quickly it became somewhat normal for people, right? Where we do have, like I said earlier, a large percentage of people who now think, well, I'm doing it effectively. I feel like I'm more productive than I ever have been before. I don't know if I plan to go back to a full-time in the office kind of position. I could see more remote work in my future. I think the other piece of that is there are a number of different factors related to COVID that could potentially influence someone's decision, not only to remain working remotely, but to choose to make a move, whether that be domestically or internationally.
Yeah, and I'll sort of add here with the question of, well, I'm working remote already, so why not move? I think many times what we have seen is that question is kind of asked and answered in the employee's head with no consultation of the employer. And this isn't malicious in any way or devious. It just seems so obvious that it shouldn't be a problem. If you can work effectively and you have an internet connection, why does it matter what state you're in? We had an example recently of one of our payroll workers who provide services to our clients reaching out to one of our payroll specialists and asking about travel expense reimbursement for Puerto Rico. So the payroll specialist looked him up, and in our records showed he was located in Chicago. So she asked, well, why are you interested in this? And his answer was, well, when the COVID figures started going up, Puerto Rico, which is where we have a vacation home, had low numbers, so we've moved there. Now, the fact is, this started a mad scramble. We do payroll in Puerto Rico through a partner. We don't do it directly. So then had to work out how to fix the situation. And I think this is a fairly common occurrence, people moving without letting anyone know because it doesn't seem like a big deal.
Yeah, I think that's completely right. We had another example just in the last couple of weeks where a client of ours was informed that someone had moved. And it was just, it was within the United States without any complexity. Without any international complexity, I should say, and assumed, well, what's the difference? If I'm sitting at my desk or my kitchen table in California, I can do the same in Texas. They found out this person has actually been doing this now for 4 months. So they have been completely unaware that this person moved 4 months ago to Texas. And again, the assumption was, hey, I can work anywhere, right? What's the difference? And I think people just don't give a lot of thought to it. I think there are, with the best of intentions, I don't think people are intentionally trying to circumvent anything. I think they just don't think about it, which you can understand. And what we're finding is, without going out and doing some kind of proactive surveying and getting and talking to folks, more of this is probably happening than people realize. So on that note, there are things you need to think about, even within the United States, and frankly, even within a single state, like California being a good example, there are really things that you need to consider when you're moving from one location to another. So, is your company even registered and set up to do business and to be able to pay someone in that location? Are you set up for taxes? Will your company be able to process the corporate tax returns in that location? Do you understand the payroll mandates, right? So all that list of various kind of legislation and whatnot, do you really understand and know how to execute the regulations in that area? And are you adhering to those? Are you adhering to all of the, and as they change, continuing to adhere to the rules and regulations in those places? If you cannot do that, or you're not prepared to do that, there are certainly some risks, fines and penalties at a minimum, in some cases, potentially lawsuits, right? If, particularly if you're treating perhaps one person differently than another, or you've just, completely failed to abide by the legislation in that particular location, there certainly could be lawsuits, tax liability, and probably one of the biggest impacts outside of all of that is, the image and brand reputation risk associated with having any of those above issues. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we call the cross-country nomad, right? So we'll focus first domestically. And what we're seeing is there's, again, a variety of reasons someone may prefer to relocate or feel the need to relocate. We're certainly, in some cases, it's a simple preference. Hey, if I can work here, I can work anywhere. In other cases, we're seeing people are asking to go back to take care of sick family members or some family obligation of some kind. We also see folks who are frankly trying to get away from high exposure areas, right? If they're in a location that is at the, the heat of the pandemic and the numbers, they're trying to move away. In some cases, it's a cost of living component, right? They're in the Bay Area and they see an opportunity to move somewhere with a much lower cost of living. And in other cases, people already have a second home. For example, like we have here, they've got a condo in the mountains somewhere and they'd like to go live in that vacation home for a period of time. I don't personally know anyone who's gone and done this yet, but I do know there were a few places that were actually offering internationally, were offering incentives to go take up residence. So that's been another thing on kind of the international side. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about a kind of very real scenario. And I think we've seen this exact one and no end of variations to this scenario over the last few months. So in this case, you've got a company who's incorporated in California, in San Jose. All of the employees historically have lived and worked in that area. And that's what this organization has been used to complying with without any problem. And they're very able to handle even the new laws there with the focus on that area. This employee X, is a US citizen, has worked with this organization for a year. But this person has a pre-existing condition that puts them at high risk to COVID. They would like to move away from everyone. They're ready to go to their cabin in Bozeman, Montana, where the numbers are very low and they can effectively kind of quarantine from everybody else. Everyone else has been working remotely from their homes in California. Shouldn't be an issue, right?
Well, wrong. So things to consider. So this is broad considerations for any move from one state to another. If you're not incorporated in Montana, you may be, by this move of employee X, be considered to be doing business in Montana, which would mean that you have to register with an agent, register with the Secretary of State, set up for corporate tax purposes. Even if you're not required to do those things, you are going to need to get set up for payroll tax purposes and for payroll compliance purposes in order to compliantly pay employee X in Montana. So if we look at the comparisons here on the next slide, California is an at-will state. Montana is not. It is the only state in the USA that is not an at-will state. So if you find yourself, you sort of permit the move, and you find yourself 6 months from now with employee X not doing so well and slacking off, you're not going to be able to terminate without building a good, strong case to do so. The taxes are different. There are no specific specialized taxes in Montana. So in some ways, an easier move. I would say moving from Montana to California would be a much trickier proposition than in this direction. There's no particular paid sick leave in Montana apart from any that applies at the federal level. San Jose follows the California paid sick leave requirements. San Jose also has an urgency ordinance, which was passed for COVID leave reasons, paid COVID leave. That doesn't apply in Montana. But in Montana, you do have to set up for unemployment taxes and workers' compensation purposes. Also need to consider whether your benefits work in Montana for employee X. It's possible that the benefits plan he is on doesn't actually work in Montana. So another consideration, also, he may have to file taxes, state taxes in Montana, and may not even be aware of that. So just some considerations there for that particular move. And with that one move, you could have been put out of compliance if he didn't tell you that he had done this.
Okay, and then Catherine, maybe we can talk about one more scenario that's very similar and would seem, frankly, even safer than the one we just talked about. So same company based in San Jose, this employee just wants to move 50 miles north to San Francisco. They can stay with a friend, they can save on rent. Seems like a no-brainer, right?
Yep, and I'm sure nobody on this webinar is surprised to hear that it is a problem. So although these cities are only 50 miles apart and are within the same state, in fact, the same area, they are in different counties, and the cities themselves have their own individual laws. So the employment laws vary. And even pre-COVID, San Francisco was famous or infamous for having a lot more employment laws than cities anywhere else in the country. So with that move from San Jose to San Francisco, many more things that need to be complied with. So on the comparison again, both of them are in California. So the withholdings, the state income tax withholdings are the same, workers' compensation the same, state unemployment the same, depending on the particular role. But in San Jose follows, as I mentioned, the California paid sick leave requirements, even pre-COVID. San Francisco has its own paid sick leave ordinance, which is more generous than the San Jose one, so gives more paid time off than in San Jose. Also in San Francisco, this particular employee would be eligible for paid parental leave once certain milestones have occurred, even pre-COVID. And post-COVID, the San Francisco Public Health Emergency Leave, which is specific to COVID paid leave, is different from that in San Jose. You can take it for different reasons or additional reasons than the urgency ordinance in San Jose. There's also in San Francisco something called the Healthy San Francisco employer tax, which has to be paid for each payable working hour for certain employees. So it is based on numbers. So you would need to have 20 people make this move or be in San Francisco before it applies to you, but certainly something to consider. Something else I'll mention, there is a potential that employee X was living in San Francisco already and commuting to your offices in San Jose. The fact is, without even moving, but we're working remotely under this scenario, the San Francisco rules or laws now apply to that employee and to you. So even without a move, there may be an issue here, just something that you need to be aware of. So in summary, looking at the US, if by having an employee move to another state, you are considered to be doing business or transacting business in that state, several registration requirements, both from a corporate registration, tax registration, need to be taken care of. Payroll mandates taken care of as well. All the employment protection laws complied with, filing of local tax returns. Also consider work and safety issues. What are the OSHA requirements in the various states? And beware of issues with discrimination. If you allow one person to move, so maybe San Jose to Bozeman, yes, do it because it's going to actually be easier for us. We're already set up there, but you don't allow the move from San Jose to San Francisco, you could have a disgruntled employee on your hands and a potential discrimination claim. So beware of that. So the legal risks really are, they speak for themselves. They tie directly into the challenges of accommodating employees moving locations. So workers' compensation and state unemployment claims by employees, they go in and apply at their local office. There's no record of them. That agency is going to come back to your company to audit, to find out how many other people are affected, and there are fines and penalties associated with that. In that case, the employee is the whistleblower by going in and making the claim. Again, not done intentionally. They're just, something, they tripped over a cord or the cat at their house, workers' compensation claim, and there's no record of them. So problematic. Lawsuits from employees, whether it's based on discrimination, for failure to provide the required leaves. In the case of our sort of Puerto Rico mystery move, travel expense reimbursements that weren't handled in the correct way. And the worst nightmare, you have enough people who have been mishandled, again, not intentionally, you could have a class action on your hands. Also, as Karen mentioned earlier, brand impact. Nowadays, as we're showing right on this webinar, as you can see us, every disgruntled person is their own media outlet, making complaints. So beware of brand damage. It's not something that you want at all.
Yeah. And I would say on that, especially in a world where, and it's the same decision isn't the right decision for every organization. But I think we all have to be realistic that we are up against, other companies that are accommodating a lot of these requests, maybe not all. So I think, that can lend itself to some disgruntled kind of reaction. And the other thing I would add again to this is when I look at these kinds of risks, I think one of the most important things you can do, and you can do very quickly, is to proactively engage with your workforce to, one, understand where they are now and what their potential desires and intentions are, and two, to outline for them what the process is, the approval process, things like that, so that they know who they need to contact, who they need to talk to, should they be contemplating something like this. So you avoid some of those scenarios where someone, unbeknownst to you, somebody has already shifted their location and has put you unknowingly at risk.
Yeah, and if you don't have a process in place yet, now would be a good time to get one in place. I think that's a really good point.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. This has been great so far. So members of the audience, as I mentioned before, we are going to have a brief poll here. So if you'll look to the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see there's some options up there. Take a moment and fill them out. And of course, what we're trying to find out is if your company has experienced an increase in remote workers who have inquired about moving to another US location or out of the country entirely. So we'll take a minute to let you all put your responses in there. Okay, and I think that's probably enough time. Let's take a look. Okay, so very substantial leader there. What do you ladies think of this? Is this consistent with what you're seeing?
It absolutely is. This has become a really, really hot topic. So this is not surprising at all. I mean, Karen?
Yeah, I think, in fact, we had talked a little bit about, well, it would be really shocking if the answer in the poll was no. This is what we would have expected. I think consistently across, for us internally in our own organization and across the many clients that we deal with, this has been a really consistent theme as of late, which is obviously why we're here.
Because there's a chunk here, there's almost 40% that have said no. I would say, back to Karen's earlier point, make sure that it really is no and you don't have some mystery movers. And for those who are unsure, again, I would say start proactively letting your employees know what the policies are, what the processes are, get those in place. But yeah, this ties in with what we've been seeing across the market and the number of questions that have been growing about, what do we do? How do we handle this?
Absolutely. So some pretty straight, and we're sort of settling around 56% yes, 35 no, and the rest unsure. But yeah, so really fascinating stuff here. Let's go back to the rest of the presentation, and we'll carry on from there.
Great. Yeah, and the one comment I would have to that as well is, well, maybe we'll see a small slowdown in that one, come maybe hopefully the middle of next year when the vaccine is out and things start to return to some level of normal. Like we talked about before, I think these requests are not going to stop. I think that's what we all have to be prepared for. I think it's potentially tempting to say, well, we're almost back to normal. I would really encourage, getting the processes in place, really thinking about this, because I think it will continue for sure. Okay, so shifting gears to the international piece of this, similar, but obviously some nuances and certainly more complexity as you look at international. We're seeing a lot of the same reasons, right? Folks who want to move potentially back home to take care of loved ones. Some who want the change of scenery. Like I said, they've got incentives out there to go shift your residence to another country. And then you also have folks who are potentially stuck or stranded because of either travel restrictions that at least happened for a period of time. I think there's probably some of those still out there. Or kind of a nightmare scenario for a lot of people where they have, their visa has expired and now they're sort of stuck and trapped. That process has taken a long time, and they may be somewhere for a much longer period of time than they ever anticipated or intended. So we'll talk about an international scenario here. Because there are so many nuances from one country to another, we have made this somewhat broad and kind of talked about multiple countries as part of the scenario instead of one. It was really hard to pick one. But same company in San Jose, Catherine. Our employee in this case is a citizen of, you name it, one of these countries. And they're here on a US work visa. This is one of those people, unfortunately, who has an elderly parent at home, and they really need support during this pandemic. He wants to move home for just a month. That's the plan initially, where he can go help get things settled for them, and then does intend to come back. What do you think of this
issues? Well, this one, I think, less surprisingly than the domestic nomad, definitely issues, or three main considerations. So the first one is, does this move trigger what is called permanent establishment? And permanent establishment is the international equivalent of doing business or transacting business across state in the US. Similar factors which result in a finding that a company has permanent establishment in another country or in a foreign country. So those are things like your business activity, employees who are located there, the amount of business being transacted, whether contracts are being signed. It varies from country to country. So every country has its own rules. So if you have requests from employees to move to 15 different countries, you're looking at 15 different sets of rules on these three main issues. The second one is employment protection laws. Again, not a surprise, but most countries have more employee-friendly laws than the US does. A lot of generous paid leaves, bonus requirements, benefits mandates, all kinds of things that we, for the most part, don't see in the US. And if you have an employee there, you may find yourself having to comply with these. Again, varies from country to country. Some countries are very generous in this regard. They'll say, well, as long as the person's only here for less than 180 days, no need, you just comply with whatever's going on in your home country. But there are countries where if you have an employee there for 1 hour, the employment protection laws are triggered. So beware and be aware of what you need to comply with. And then the payroll mandates. How do you handle taxes, the equivalent, the foreign equivalents of workers' compensation, state unemployment, and then benefits even more than state to state? Very unlikely that your benefit plan is applicable in a foreign country. How is that going to work out for your employee? So looking at the challenges, really many of the same things, but there are some additional nuances, including the fact that in some countries, international non-compliance can trigger criminal penalties. So it's not just fines and penalties, it's criminal penalties, and even bans on your company from doing business legitimately there going forward. So that if you did have expansion plans, international expansion plans, you may find yourself in a world of hurt and not being able to transact business because of failing to comply with these employment regulations and permanent establishment rules. Also consider data security and protection issues. There may be some countries where if your employee is moving there, taking a company laptop, exposing company data in a country where data protection is a problem, that's something else you need to consider, be aware of, have a policy for. I have heard of situations where employees who are given permission to move to another country are given a new laptop, specially encrypted with all kinds of firewalls, etc., so as to avoid the potential damage that can be done through data security issues. Again, discrimination. If you allow one person to move to India, for example, but another one not to move to Mexico, could be problematic. I will say that the odds of being sued internationally are probably fairly low, but full compliance should be the aim for every company. And there's the negative or the brand damage that can occur if things go wrong. But if you are sued cross-border, it's very difficult to manage that, enforce that, find counsel who can help you, and in a cost-effective and competent manner, help you in this. So better to proactively fix things up front rather than trying to deal with these on the back end where these when these problems come up. And so the legal, I think, sort of already touched on all of these, the criminal payroll violations, the data security issues. Karen, I don't know if you had any comments on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think we pretty well covered those. I would re-add in kind of the potential for visa challenges, right? I think that's something you've really got to be in tune with if you move forward with something like this, making sure that they're active. These things are taking longer to process, so you got to really be on top of the visa expiration. And then I guess just commentary. We've had here at TalentWave, we've had 3 of these requests just in the last week. From some of our customers, of folks who are asking, and the customer is trying to make it work for them to move internationally. They happen to be 3 different countries, so really relevant that we were talking about a slew of them there.
Yeah, absolutely. And really good point about the visas. I mean, this is a big deal. A lot of foreign embassies are closed, so you may have somebody, the visa expires, cannot get to a US consulate or embassy. And they're stuck, and Department of Homeland Security has really slowed down in the processing of visas because of COVID challenges. So what do you do then? Sort of suspend them, terminate them? And if you then terminate them, have you now run afoul of the local country rules when it comes to terminating or not terminating? So be aware and beware.
Another poll, guys, as the slide would dictate. So just to mix things up, we want to look at now how prepared you feel your company is to handle an increase in requests from employees to temporarily relocate during COVID-19 and beyond. So same process as before, just take a look at the options there in the right-hand corner of your screen. And then in just a moment, we will switch over and take a look at the results. So, okay, guys, another clear winner, although I bet these people aren't feeling exactly like winners right now if they're not at all prepared.
Yeah, interesting. Again, I would say not surprising because of just how quickly this has all happened and how much more complex it's gotten. So I wouldn't say I'm surprised by that answer. I do think I'm sure there's some nervousness and anxiousness around that, obviously, especially given the first poll where we're seeing, we're majority of folks don't feel well prepared, but they are getting these kinds of requests from people. So I think you can kind of start with some of this, and I'm sure other research you've been doing to start thinking about your strategy here. While it is complex, I think, and we'll get into this soon, there are some ways that you can approach this without too much trouble and complexity.
Yeah, these are, again, not, as you say, Karen, not surprising numbers, but yeah, the feeling of being, hopefully this is sort of given some help or some guidance on the things to look out for. And I would sort of recommend, again, get some help to get this done from outside counsel or whatever you need to get ahead of this. And for the 5% of the I don't knows, back to start looking into what's happening with your workforce and proactively communicating with them so that they're aware of the company expectations, processes, procedures, etc. So, yep.
It does make me wonder how many of you potentially felt at least somewhat prepared before we started scaring you with some of this. Hopefully not. Hopefully this is just arming you with what you need, but there's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, a before and after would be interesting.
Yeah, it would be interesting.
All right, well, we'll keep that in mind and keep moving here. So I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Yeah, so this would not be complete without us being able to suggest some approaches here. And the first one, which I haven't mentioned at all to this point, but it is something that I would be remiss not to, because independent contractor compliance is our core business. I think there is some thought somewhere to, the easy way to do this is anybody who wants to move, if we're not incorporated wherever they're going, not set up to do business, all we'll do is we will just treat them as an independent contractor going forward. Makes it so much easier. No payroll taxes, no benefits, and none of these payroll mandates or anything like that. So they leave on Friday, they move to Bozeman, Montana on Monday, and from Monday, they're an independent contractor and we'll be issuing them a 1099 in January for the work that they do there. And I will say at that point, stop, do not do it. You cannot contractually agree with somebody that they are an independent contractor. Being an independent contractor is something that you have to qualify to be. It's not something that you can contract around or agree to if the indicators are that the person isn't actually independent. So the likelihood of employee X being an employee on Friday and being a true independent contractor on Monday is highly unlikely unless between Friday and Monday, he established a business providing different services from the services he was providing to you on Friday as an employee, has set up a business and has business documentation to show that that has happened, has other clients, and in some states, particularly California and others, in addition, needs to be doing something that is outside of the ordinary course of your business. AB 5, which took effect in January this year in California, means that anybody doing business as part of your ordinary course of business cannot qualify as an independent contractor unless they're Uber or Lyft under Proposition 22, which just passed during the November election timeframe. So don't do this. The reason I've put the sort of legal, it depends on the costs to implement and maintain, because executing is really easy. Abandon everything, move them over, get rid of the tax withholding and just pay them lump sums. They can take care of the self-employment tax themselves and their benefits and everything else. If that person is found to be misclassified, And if you have a lot of people you've done this with and they're all found to be misclassified, the fines, the penalties, the class action lawsuits are extremely costly. And recognize that the way it works is if they're found to have been misclassified, everything that they should have been getting as an employee is now what they get, together with all the time that you didn't treat them or classify them correctly, with the fines, the penalties, etc. And in some states in this country, there are criminal penalties associated with the deliberate misclassification of people as independent contractors. Department of Labor will be after you, state unemployment officers, workers' comp, all of these friends. And at an international level, each country has its own rules about who qualifies as an independent contractor or not. And they're not the same rules that we use in the US necessarily. So just beware, don't do it unless they really are independent contractors. And I will get off my soapbox and hand over to Karen to talk about the next possibility, which is a possibility.
Yeah, I was going to say, so while we have it listed as option one, technically, if you choose to take that risk, it's an option, but what we're saying is not an option. The rest, truly, I think you've got some options here. So the next one is, you set yourself up in a way to comply and be able to accommodate these kinds of requests, right? So it is absolutely feasible with the help of legal counsel that you can register in these states and you can monitor and comply with the legislation in those states and set yourselves up to actively make that happen. And obviously the level of effort on that one is going to vary by company based on what you've got in place today, right? If you're the company in our example earlier, where really it's been 100% California focused and you're now trying to go out to numerous other states, that's going to be a bit more complex than adding a few to what you already have. So it'll vary a bit. In general, though, the risk of this, if you do this right, the risk of this is very low. If you're set up appropriately in each place, you're in great shape. The challenge is the effort can be extremely high. Obviously,
and I can testify from experience in registering in all 50 states, it is a pain.
Yeah, exactly. Having gone through all of that, it's a lot of work, as you can imagine. And then just the maintenance, right? Keeping up with the laws as they change and making sure that you're continuing to implement and execute against any of those changes. And for those same reasons, the cost can be high. So, not only is it a one-time, setup fee, but in a lot of cases, you're paying annually for registration in those places. And again, I think just kind of the legal and administrative cost can be substantial, both in setup and ongoing monitoring and maintenance.
And I think the third one here, so preventing the employee from moving, this is an option. The risk level is high because you could upset the employee. Easy to execute because you would terminate somebody who insists on moving when you're not set up to do business. But it is something that absolutely you could do. I would say before doing that, do seek the help of outside counsel. The fact is, an employee cannot force you into non-compliance by moving to a place where you're not established and not willing to establish yourself. So there is that option. But if this is an employee who is highly skilled, who you really don't want to lose, has compelling reasons why they really need to make this move, you may want to accommodate them. You may want to do something, and maybe you don't want to set up that corporate entity. So there is another option. So Karen, the final option here to explore.
Yeah. Yeah, there are absolutely ways to get help with this and not have to take it on yourself. So quite a few organizations choose to partner on this activity or outsource this activity to a third-party payroll provider or an international PEO who can help, right? These are folks who already have the infrastructure in place, whether it be in all 50 states or in the case of international, where they're set up to do that internationally. And they can not only get they already have it in place, they can also be responsible and take the burden off of you to be continuously kind of maintaining and monitoring. So, from that perspective, risk is low, right? If you've got the right partner, that risk is very low. They are taking care of all of that for you. The executional effort, I would say, is medium. It's not nothing for sure. And the biggest component of that is change management, right? It's communication with these employees. It's transitioning them over, making sure they understand what's happening and why, and getting that in place. Outside of that, the cost in comparison to doing it all yourself is quite low as well.
And Karen, I know we're sort of running short of time. There's sort of questions, I think, coming up. So yeah.
Yeah, so we'll go very quickly. I do want to make sure we get to your questions. I think should you choose to go with that last option, I think just there are certainly some benefits. I think I spoke to most of them. The most important being you can get, both the administrative complexity and burden off of your organization and have peace of mind that you are well protected, that your worker is well protected, and that person has the same peace of mind, right? Then they know what to expect. They're in good hands, and they can still continue forward with the work they're doing with your organization. You're not losing that talent. And they're receiving benefits and all those good things all the while. And then the very last component of that, I wanted to share some advice. Should you choose to partner with an expert, I won't go through all of this, I promise you. But I think there are just some key things to consider and to make sure you're looking for in whoever you choose to partner with. I mean, first and foremost, you want someone who is already equipped to handle this. So they're already registered in all 50 states. You want someone who is on top of and abreast of all of the current legislation. Someone who has done this and is able to accommodate, in addition to keeping you compliant and safe, you also want to make sure, obviously, that you've got someone who can adhere to your policies, be part of an extension of kind of your brand with these folks, and make sure they're following all of your internal onboarding procedures and those sorts of things. And you definitely want to make sure that they've got the right level of kind of legal and compliance awareness and know-how, so that you're truly protected, and that you can have that peace of mind. Didn't leave a whole lot of time for questions. I apologize for that.
Waxing lyrical about independent contractors. I think I burnt up some few minutes there.
It's a passion topic.
That's right. Well, your passion shone through. We do have a couple of questions from the audience, and I do want to remind everybody too that the folks at TalentWave will be getting a copy of everything you've written in the Q&A log. So if they are able to follow, if you have a question and we don't get to it, they do have the ability to follow up on it if they're able. So one question we got here is from Lynn, and Lynn says, you mentioned it would be a good idea to put a policy and process in place about working remotely in a different city, state, or internationally. Are there examples or toolkits available for review?
It's a great question. We don't particularly have one, I don't think, Karen. I'm not sure on the operational side.
Yeah, no, it has varied, quite honestly, from one client to another. I would say, and in those cases, it's not a state-by-state guide for these folks. It's more of a holistic policy of what your approach is. So one, if you plan to accommodate that, I think it's more a process of how do I go about requesting it, making it clear, probably in most cases, it's making it clear that it's a request that needs to be reviewed and approved with the appropriate approval process within your organization. And then I think it's just setting up the infrastructure internally to say who does need to approve it. And then, and obviously, depending on your approach here, then how are you going to accommodate that request in what time frame? So to me, it's more about making sure people understand they cannot go somewhere without letting you know, and that there is an official kind of request or approval process should someone want to make a move.
Yeah. That's great.
Okay, so this one I just have to get to. so it's from Lisa, and she says, I have an employee on an O1 visa. He's decided to get an RV and travel around the country while working. How does this affect his right to work under the visa? And you guys may hate me for
That's a great question, and one I have not come across before, so I will add this to my collection. So I go back to every state has its own rules as to how long does the person have to work in that state before it triggers things like payroll mandates. So it really depends on how much time they're spending in each of those locations as to what has to happen in that location. I mean, I think if they're spending a week at a time in each state as they drive through all 50 states, yeah, that's a tricky one. Perhaps it goes back to where the original location was, but that would be one I would say get some advice of outside counsel for that. That's a particularly challenging one, and with the visa thrown in on top of it, extra fun. So yeah, very good luck with that. I mean, Karen, I don't know if you have additional insight there.
Definitely not. That is by far the most interesting one I've heard yet.
Absolutely. So with that, just a reminder, everybody will get the folks at TalentWave will get to see all the questions you guys asked. But great job. And I do want to remind everybody too that this webcast has been approved for HRCI, SHRM, and HCI returning education credits. So if you want to get access to those, you just go to My HCI dashboard, then Learning, then click Download Transcript. Just give us about 24 hours once we finish up here today, and we will have all of those access codes or credit codes readily available for you. And one more thing while you're there, please don't forget to check out hci.org for even more free content, as well as information on our certifications and events. I'd love to say one more thank you to our presenters today for being Karen and Catherine for being really informative on a topic that's obviously important to a lot of our members today, and also just for being great sports as I throw the most strange questions at them from the audience. So thank you guys, and also thank you to TalentWave for making it all possible. And finally, thank you to you, the webcast viewer. Thanks for spending an hour with us. Keep your stick on the ice. Hey, stay healthy, and we will see you next time.